My life had settled into a quiet rhythm, one that felt neither comforting nor satisfying. Mornings began with a black coffee. Afternoons were spent fulfilling obligations that no longer stirred any passion in me, and evenings slipped away in silence. At 54, I had come to accept this routine as the natural course of aging. Yet, in my heart, there was a lingering ache, a whisper of longing I tried my best to ignore. It was on an ordinary Wednesday that everything changed. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of early autumn, and I found myself wandering the grocery store aisles without much purpose. My basket held the usual: a loaf of bread, some fruit, a bottle of wine I would sip alone that evening. And then I saw him. He stood near the produce section, examining apples with a focus that made me smile. There was something magnetic about him, not just his youth, though he couldn't have been much older than 30, but his presence. He radiated energy, life, and an easy charm I hadn't felt in anyone in years. I wasn't sure what compelled me to speak to him. Perhaps it was the way he frowned at the fruit in his hands, or the fact that I could sense he was lost in his own way. "The Fuji ones are usually the sweetest," I said, surprising myself. He turned, startled but not displeased, his green eyes meeting mine. A small smile crept across his face. "Thanks. I was just trying to figure that out." We exchanged a few more words, light and inconsequential, but I couldn't help noticing how effortlessly the conversation flowed. When he introduced himself as Daniel, the sound of his name felt oddly significant. He made me laugh with a comment about how he always picked the wrong fruit despite his best efforts. The encounter was brief, and yet as I walked out of the store, I couldn't shake the memory of his smile. For the first time in years, I felt a spark, a small, flickering light in the monotony of my days. Was it just a fleeting moment of connection? Or could it mean something more? The thought lingered, a question I couldn't yet answer, but one that refused to leave me that I didn't expect to see him again. Yet, life has a curious way of placing people in your path when you least expect it. It happened 2 weeks later, at the same grocery store. I was reaching for a carton of milk when I heard a familiar voice behind me. "Taking your advice, Fuji apples this time." I turned, and there he was, holding up a bag of fruit with a boyish grin. My chest tightened with surprise and, if I was honest with myself, a flutter of excitement. "Good choice," I replied, trying to keep my voice light. From there, our conversation flowed easily. We spoke about everything and nothing: his job as a graphic designer, the challenges of my work managing a local nonprofit, and our mutual distaste for crowded supermarkets. When he asked if I wanted to grab a coffee sometime, I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to, but because the idea seemed so improbable. But his sincerity broke through my doubt. "It's just coffee," he said, his tone gentle but persistent. "I promise I don't bite." And so I found myself sitting across from him at a cozy cafe later that week. The hours passed effortlessly as we shared stories, laughter, and little pieces of our lives. He was open and curious, his youthful optimism a sharp contrast to the guardedness I had carried for so long. What struck me most was his attentiveness. He listened in a way that felt rare, like he truly cared about what I had to say. Over time, these moments multiplied. We began meeting regularly, sometimes for coffee, other times for walks in the park. I couldn't remember the last time I had looked forward to someone's company like this. There was an ease between us, a sense of understanding that required no explanation. And yet I couldn't ignore the questions forming in my mind. Was this just a fleeting connection? Did he see me as more than just a friend? Did I even want him to? I tried to push the thoughts away, but with every shared laugh, every thoughtful glance, the questions grew harder to ignore. That I never expected it to happen. Not like this, not with him. Daniel and I had settled into an easy rhythm of friendship. Our meetings felt like a welcome reprieve from the monotony of my routine. Each time we parted, I carried a lingering warmth with me, like the afterglow of a summer evening. But something shifted one quiet afternoon. We had decided to meet at a small park tucked away from the bustling streets. Autumn leaves blanketed the ground, and the air was crisp but inviting. He brought 2 cups of hot chocolate, laughing as he handed one to me, saying it was a seasonal upgrade from our usual coffee. We sat on a bench overlooking a pond, watching ducks glide across the still water. Our conversation was light at first, his latest design project, a book I had recently rediscovered. But then, As the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in soft hues of gold and pink, our words slowed, giving way to something deeper. He turned to me, his green eyes catching the fading light. "You know, you're probably one of the most interesting people I've ever met," he said, his voice steady and sincere. I felt the heat rise to my cheeks, caught off guard by his candor. "You're just saying that because I keep you supplied with life advice," I teased, trying to deflect the growing tension. But he didn't laugh. Instead, he shook his head. "No, I mean it. You see things differently. You make me think, I don't know, want to be better." His words settled between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. My heart raced, a mix of fear and exhilaration. I glanced away, focusing on the ducks in the pond, but I could feel his gaze lingering on me. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't just fond of him. This wasn't just a friendship. Somewhere along the way, without even realizing it, I had started to feel something deeper, something that both thrilled and terrified me. I spent the rest of the day in a haze, his words replaying in my mind. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't escape the truth. I was falling for him. But how could I? The doubts came rushing in. The 24-year gap between us suddenly loomed like a chasm. What would people think? What would he think if he knew? Was I foolish to even entertain these feelings? Or was this one of those rare moments in life where you're called to take a leap, no matter how daunting it seems? The days that followed were a storm of emotions. I went from feeling like a giddy teenager to berating myself for even considering the possibility of something more. Every glance in the mirror was a reminder of the lines etched by time, the silver strands woven into my hair. What could someone like Daniel, vibrant and full of possibility, see in someone like me? Yet, every time we were together, those insecurities seemed to fade. He had a way of making me feel seen, not for the age I carried, but for the person I was. He noticed the small things, how I liked my coffee, the way I lit up when I spoke about a book I loved, the fact that I wore my grandmother's bracelet every day. Still, doubt clung to me. One evening, after a particularly restless day, I confided in my best friend Claire. Over a glass of wine, I hesitantly told her about Daniel. Her eyes widened, but instead of the judgment I feared, she laughed. "So he's younger. Big deal. Do you like him?" "It's not that simple," I protested. "What would people say? What if I'm just imagining all of this?" Claire tilted her head, studying me. "You've spent so much of your life worrying about what others think. Maybe it's time to think about what you want." Her words stuck with me, haunting and liberating at the same time. The next time I saw Daniel, I couldn't help but notice how natural it felt to be around him. We were walking through the city, the evening air crisp and cool. He made some silly joke about a billboard we passed, and I laughed, really laughed. It was the kind of laugh that bubbled up from somewhere deep, chasing away the tension that had been coiled in my chest for days. He looked at me, his expression soft. "I love it when you laugh like that," he said, almost to himself. And just like that, the tension came rushing back, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was something else entirely, a realization that this connection, whatever it was, wasn't something I could ignore. That night I lay awake, turning everything over in my mind. I had been so caught up in what was appropriate that I hadn't stopped to consider what was real. Daniel made me feel alive in a way I hadn't felt in years. Wasn't that worth exploring, no matter the risks? But then came the nagging questions, the ones that wouldn't let me rest. Did he feel the same? Or was I reading too much into every look, every kind word? Would taking a step towards something more ruin the easy companionship we had built? I didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear. I couldn't keep running from my feelings. The decision came to me quietly, almost without warning. I had been mulling over the idea for days, unsure of how to bridge the gap between the friendship we had and the deeper connection I was beginning to feel. It was late one afternoon when I finally found the courage to ask. Daniel had been texting me about a new art exhibit in town, and without thinking too much about it, I suggested we go together. But then a thought lingered. Maybe we could do something more personal, something that would bring us closer. "Why don't you come over to my place first? I'll make dinner, and we can talk before we head to the exhibit," I typed, my fingers trembling slightly as I pressed send. It was one of those moments where the excitement of possibility collided with the sting of uncertainty. What if he didn't feel the same way? What if he thought I was rushing things? But then the thought of spending more time with him, of having him in my space, was so compelling that it pushed all the doubts aside. He replied almost immediately, "I'd love that. I'll bring wine. What time should I be there?" The words brought a flutter to my chest, a quiet thrill I couldn't ignore. I went into a flurry of activity, choosing a simple recipe I felt confident preparing. It wasn't about the food. It was about creating an atmosphere, a moment where we could be together without the usual distractions. As the evening approached, my thoughts scattered. I wasn't nervous in the way I might have expected, but I was aware of how everything felt different now. This wasn't just dinner. It was a step into something uncharted, something that felt both thrilling and terrifying. When the doorbell rang, my heart skipped a beat. I opened the door to find Daniel standing there, a bottle of red wine in hand and that warm smile I had come to treasure. "Hi," he said softly, stepping inside. "I hope I didn't keep you waiting too long." "No," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "You're just in time. Dinner's almost ready." The warmth of his presence filled the room, and for a moment, I felt as if time had slowed. There was an ease between us that was almost palpable. But beneath the calm, I could sense the tension, the unspoken understanding that we were both aware of what this evening could mean. We moved to the kitchen, the conversation flowing easily as we prepared the meal together. His laughter, the casual brush of his hand against mine as we passed ingredients, the soft hum of our shared space. It all felt so natural, yet charged with an undercurrent of anticipation. As we sat down to eat, I looked across the table at him, the glow of the candlelight dancing in his eyes. And in that moment, I realized that this wasn't just dinner anymore. This was a moment of connection, of vulnerability, of stepping into something that felt both inevitable and terrifying. I didn't know where it would lead, but I knew that I couldn't turn back. Not now. The evening unfolded with a quiet grace, a rhythm that felt natural, yet charged with an energy I hadn't anticipated. Daniel's presence in my home, the familiarity of his smile, and the ease with which we spoke made everything feel just right. There was no need for pretense, no forced conversation. It was as if we had always known each other. We ate, talked, laughed, and sipped the wine he'd brought, the warmth of the evening settling around us like a comforting blanket. I found myself watching him more than I meant to, his every gesture, his every word, carrying an intimacy that deepened with every passing moment. There were pauses, small silences between us that spoke louder than any conversation, as if we both understood something unspoken. After dinner, we moved to the living room, the soft glow of the table lamp casting shadows that made everything feel more intimate. I suggested we sit by the window, where the night was calm and the city lights flickered like distant stars. There was something so soothing about the quiet hum of the world outside, the world that felt so far from the intensity we shared in that moment. Daniel leaned closer, his presence overwhelming in the best possible way. I felt the heat radiating from him, felt the subtle, unspoken shift between us. My heart was racing, but I couldn't look away. The uncertainty that had plagued me earlier was still there, but it was now intertwined with something else, a pull, a need, a longing I hadn't expected. He reached for my hand, his fingers brushing mine gently before intertwining with them. His touch was soft, yet it sparked a current of something deeper between us. I looked into his eyes, searching for something, anything that would confirm the bond one was feeling. "I'm glad you invited me over," he said, his voice low and warm. "I've been wanting to spend more time with you. It feels right, doesn't it?" His words were simple, but they held an honesty that struck me to my core. Yes, it felt right. It felt more right than anything I had experienced in years. But there was fear too. Fear of what would come next, of the possibility that we might cross a line that could change everything. Still, I couldn't deny what I felt. I nodded slowly, my voice barely a whisper. "It does. But it's complicated, isn't it?" He smiled, that easy, reassuring smile that had come to mean so much to me. "I think we make it as complicated as we want it to be," he said. "Sometimes, we just need to let go of the fear." And in that moment, I felt the weight of everything I had been holding on to, my doubts, my insecurities, my fear of judgment fall away. The connection between us, the tenderness, was undeniable. It was something raw, real, and undeniable. As if on cue, The room seemed to shrink, the space between us closing in. There was no more talking, no more barriers. I leaned in, my heart pounding as our lips met for the first time. It was gentle at first, a soft exploration of what had been building between us. But as the kiss deepened, there was an urgency, a hunger I hadn't expected. It wasn't rushed, but it was filled with an intensity that mirrored the emotions swirling inside me. Every touch, every kiss, felt like an awakening, an acknowledgement of everything I had been too afraid to admit. I had spent so many years convincing myself that love, intimacy, and passion were things of the past, things that belonged to a younger version of myself. But with him in that moment, I realized how wrong I had been. And for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to be completely, utterly present. The days that followed felt like a blur, a whirlwind of emotions, and a series of quiet revelations. I found myself replaying every moment we had shared, every touch, every word. The intensity of what had happened between Daniel and me didn't settle into the corners of my mind as I had expected. Instead, it lingered, an ache, a warmth, a reminder of something I had long forgotten. I had spent so many years in solitude, wrapped in the comfort of routine and the quiet acceptance of my own loneliness. The years had passed in a gentle march, each one blending into the next, each year adding a layer of comfort, but also of resignation. I never imagined that at my age, I would feel this alive, this scene. And yet, with Daniel, I felt as though I was rediscovering myself in ways I couldn't have anticipated. There were moments, of course, when the doubts would creep in. I couldn't deny the age gap that loomed between us. At times, it felt impossible to ignore. How could someone so young be interested in someone like me? I questioned everything, from my appearance to my worth. The world had a way of reminding us of our place, didn't it? A woman my age shouldn't be thinking about love, or passion, or anything that felt this new. But then I would remember the way Daniel had looked at me, the warmth in his eyes, the genuine affection in his voice. It wasn't pity, it wasn't something fleeting. It was real. I had spent years trying to fit into the mold that society had created for me, accepting the idea that love, real love, was for the young, for the fresh-faced, for those who hadn't yet seen the full weight of life. But Daniel had shown me otherwise. With him I felt vibrant. I felt seen in a way I hadn't in a long time. And it wasn't just physical, it was emotional, mental, and yes, even spiritual. I spent quiet nights alone, contemplating what this all meant. Was it just a fleeting moment? Something born out of the closeness of our time together? Something temporary? Or was it something deeper, something more enduring? The truth was I didn't know. But what I did know was that the connection between us was something I couldn't deny. Every moment I spent with him felt like a challenge to the years of preconceived notions I had about love, age, and what it meant to truly live. Love wasn't confined to an age. It didn't belong to the young, or to the idealized version of life we're told we should have. It belonged to anyone brave enough to reach out, to risk vulnerability, to embrace the beauty of another person. And in Daniel, I found that courage, both his and my own. As the days passed, I allowed myself to let go of the fears, the self-imposed limitations. I stopped asking myself if I was too old or too much for him. Instead, I simply accepted what was unfolding, trusting that we both had something to learn from this unexpected connection. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't without its challenges. But what I realized was that love, true love, isn't bound by age or by societal expectations. It's about the moments we create, the feelings we share, and the bravery we find within ourselves to embrace what we deserve, no matter when or how it comes into our lives. With Daniel, I had learned that love wasn't just something I was capable of, it was something I could have at any stage in life. And for that, I was deeply grateful. As I reflect on the journey we've taken together, the unexpected love that has blossomed between Daniel and me, I find myself overwhelmed with gratitude. In the quiet of my home, surrounded by the stillness of the night, I realize how much my life has shifted, how much I have changed. Love, for so long, had seemed like something distant, something reserved for the young or for the idealized version of what it should be. Yet here I am in my 50s, living a love that feels just as real, just as profound, as any I had ever imagined. The world doesn't always make room for love at our age. There are whispers of judgment, of raised eyebrows, of skepticism. People tell us what we should want, who we should be with, and when we should settle down. And yet, love doesn't obey rules, doesn't follow timelines or societal expectations. It finds its way when it's meant to, in whatever form it may take. With Daniel, I have come to understand that love, in its purest form, is not bound by years or milestones. It is not something confined to youth, to perfect moments, to the things we think we should desire. Love is messy, beautiful, and raw. It's about two people finding each other, seeing each other beyond the masks we wear, and connecting in a way that transcends the years that may separate us. I have learned, too, that love requires us to embrace vulnerability. It's about being open to the possibility of rejection, the fear of judgment, and yet daring to move forward. It's about realizing that, regardless of age, we are all worthy of love. What Daniel and I have is not defined by age, nor by any preconceived notion of what love should be. It is something that belongs only to us. It is our story, our connection, our shared moments of tenderness, excitement, and quiet joy. And for the first time in a long while, I no longer question whether it's right or wrong. It is simply real. I have learned to embrace love, not just for what it gives me, but for what it teaches me about myself, about vulnerability, and about the courage to live authentically. We may not know what the future holds, but I no longer fear it. I have discovered that love can thrive at any age, that it has the power to transform us, to open our hearts, and to awaken the parts of ourselves we thought were long gone. So, to anyone who may be hesitant, anyone who thinks they are too old, too tired, too broken for love, I say this: don't let age or fear or the opinions of others hold you back. Love is a force that has no expiration date. It comes when it's meant to, and it will always be worth the wait. And for me, the wait is over. I have found something extraordinary, something beautiful, and I know that, whatever comes next, I am ready to embrace it with open arms.